Thank you.
You're going to want to move to the side of the air.
Thank you. That's very loud, and I have been a coach, so I felt I could probably do this without a mic, but probably it's a good idea for me to use it. I also want to thank you for attending this evening. We did have, and we do have, a listening session scheduled for Trout Elementary. I'll tell you, my last listening session, I had about 4 people at, and we talked about a few things. But I anticipated, based upon the emails that you've been sending us and the communication, that it would be advisable that we did have a meeting here tonight. So, as Ellen mentioned, what I'd like to begin by saying is a few words about the facility utilization process that the district is conducting, and what resulted then in the option that I think that has you concerned. The facility utilization process is something that the district does on a regular basis, meaning we have to look at our boundaries. We have to look at how our facilities are being utilized. And what we are experiencing in Poudre School District presently is that some of our buildings aren't as well utilized, meaning that they're not utilized at capacity, and that creates some budgetary issues for the district. And so we had a facility planning team look at various topics, and one of the topics that they looked at was the potential location for a small high school. They looked at many other factors. We have issues relative to where will lab school be placed? Where would we place early childhood programs if we wanted to move them? How can we more optimally use all our facilities? The one element that is important to remember as the district as a whole is trying to do the best thing for all the district. And one of the considerations with regards to our elementary schools when it comes to capacity then would be, are we efficiently using our buildings? And I think that's one of the things that this committee really looked very critically at. And they did it in a manner which attempted to do this without bias towards one school or another. And they came up with the recommendations that you saw published in the Colorado. One of the things which the district is doing that I really want to focus with you on is a feasibility study. Because we recognize that with this particular process, it would be important to take into many other considerations and not just the optimal use of our facilities. So that's the phase that we're going through next, is looking at these recommendations, and only a portion of these recommendations based upon that particular criteria. So what else do we have to look at? We have to look at issues that I see raised in your emails relative to geographic proximity. We have to look at issues about transportation. Many of you in emails that you've sent to the district are concerned about transportation coming into your school site here. You've raised questions about parking and whether there be suitable parking for a high school facility. So all those kinds of issues have yet to be really given consideration, and they are extremely important, let alone educational program, which is our fundamental mission, is how are we best going to serve all the students of PSD. So with that in mind, let me just speak very briefly about why a small high school in PSD, and when the feasibility study would probably even start looking at it. The charge to the feasibility committee is to look for a placement for lab first, as well as moving the early childhood programs out of Ballard, or I'm sorry, not out of Ballard, into Ballard potentially, but out of Barton and Fouillon. And so we have those programs presently placed there, and we see placing those programs into some other schools. That's the first charge of the committee. That's going to take a lot of their effort. And as I've talked with the committee chair about this, I anticipate that the long-term implications may not be even moved to until 2010. till spring of 2010. So the timeline of April of 2010 has much more to do with boundaries for the district and also the placement of these other programs. And I think that one of the things that hasn't been clear in the communication, I think it's clearer in some of our district communication, has been around the long-term study. So let me briefly explain why we see the need for a small high school. Presently, in the school system, the 5th grade would represent the smallest class that we have moving through the Poudre schools. And it works out that that class then will go through, and you can see this with where, if you have children or you know kids that are involved at Rocky or at Poudre, those schools are more crowded this year, and that enrollment will start shifting out of those schools. And so if the 5th grade is the smallest class, we have several years really till we need a small high school. So why would the district put out communication like this? The district is also anticipating that we would want to go or consider going for a bond in 2010. And the way that the bond and bill process has worked in the district, we need to be able to anticipate what our needs are and then plan for them. So the feasibility committee will be taking all these things into consideration as it needs. And I think that one of the things that hasn't been as clear as it could be, although some of our communication is pretty clear about the role of the feasibility committee. And the facility planning committee was solely looking at facilities, not taking into many other considerations that are extremely important for us before any recommendation is made. The timeline, again, around April 2010, we believe we need to be working hard on boundaries, but we need to be taking other things into consideration with regards to facilities. So if we move, let's just say lab moves into an existing school, then that school's capacity is going to be affected by the movement of lab, which then has to be taken into consideration when you do the boundaries.
Where are you in lab?
I'll answer the question. We will be moving lab because the Washington site has some restrictions on it as far as ADA compliance. And so back in 2006, when we made a number of different recommendations that the board approved, then we said we needed to move lab rather than put any additional resources into lab. Okay? I believe people may want to make some statements that I will listen to. I really have tried to give you the scope of what I know, but there may be some other points. Paul, next, please.
Actually, we'll make a statement later on. But so my name is Paul Manti, and I'm the chairman of the State Lopez Community Action Group, which is formed, and we had a committee meeting last night to discuss and to prioritize questions that we wanted to make sure that the Poudre School District heard as we consider these options moving forward. And I think you mentioned one option of was called for closure, but when you look at the proposal, all four viable, realistic options call for either closing or repurposing Lopez. I mean, is that how everyone else has read that? There is no other option listed in the Colorado and on Sunday or sent out and circulated by the school district that allows for any other option that has a realistic chance of occurring because of the finances involved that doesn't repurpose or close. So I guess what we'd like to know is the small school study report that's closed out last year indicates a possible closure for K through 6 schools that have attendance population between 250 and 325 students. Lopez, which is a K through 5 school now, has 372 students and is not within this range.